The truth of the matter is that we've been making money through encouraging people to come here from other countries, and now we can't fulfill the promise that we had given them. There's many of these things that ended up being scams. There's these circumventions, and also a government that's putting rules across almost everybody, but then letting just a couple people that their favorites are pass, right? Like, we've seen investigations into companies like SNC-Lavalin and others just dry up and disappear. This is a sign that we are in the mix, that this is not as what it appears.
Welcome to Supply and Demand with Adam Nadler. This is a podcast dedicated to the real estate market in Canada, available now on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Taylor Hack, how you doing, man?
I'm doing awesome. Good to see you, Adam.
Nice seeing you too. For everybody listening, can you just give a quick introduction of who you are?
My name is Taylor. I'm a real estate agent and team leader in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I've been in the top 1% for my global brand for most of my career. I like to help people. Helping families really inspires me. And I travel around as a professional speaker throughout North America and talk to real estate agents. I'm kind of a real estate nerd, I guess.
Well, you are for sure one of the smartest people I've ever met, hands down. And you do have a way of putting things that just kind of clicks and makes sense. And so I really wanted to kind of get some lessons from the prairies, I guess, from you guys. Well, I mean, you're in Edmonton. It's not so much the prairies, but just lessons from your market, because you guys saw a really soft market while our market was ripping hot for like 10 years. And then now it seems flipped, where our market is definitely, slowed down a lot, and your market's now ripping. So I guess what would be the lessons from Edmonton for Torontonians in your view?
It's interesting. I'm going to kind of dive into like a brief history of us. And what I mean by that is Edmonton is a city. So technically we would classify as the prairies. Just to the west of us is mountainous, and that leads into BC. If you were to take a look at the people that live here, think hardworking farm folk, primarily in the oil industry. But the oil industry is cyclic, and that's really been Alberta's one-trick pony for a long time, and that pony hasn't done tricks in some time. And what I mean by that is that I've been in real estate in the industry for over 20 years, doing mortgages before I came into real estate. We saw situations, kind of what you saw in pandemic in like 2005 and 2006, where the property here literally doubled in price over a couple of years. And then we went into the U.S. financial crisis of 2000, really kind of hit us in 2008, 2009. And then all of a sudden, as I was starting my real estate career in 2012, 13, and 14, we saw record oil prices. Now, what that looks like is, first off, I live in a city that's roughly 1 million people. And suddenly we get massive influx, because it is a nationwide announcement that electricians and plumbers and other tradespeople can come here, and young people can literally make $250,000 a year with a journeyman ticket. So that's why they come here in droves. We normally get people from Atlantic Canada, a lot of newfies, and they end up being the owners and tenants of the entry level to our market. So apartment style condos, townhouses, and duplexes. But then in 2015, oil went down. We ended up with a different government provincially, and they weren't interested in development of our resources or making better deals to get them to market. And so all of those people from Atlantic Canada, you can't even find them anymore. Like, I've literally seen restaurants here like the Atlantic Trap and Grill close down because that group is gone. So we went through this period of 2015 to 2021 where real estate literally went down every single year. So you buy a house, maybe you buy an apartment. The apartments and townhouses, man, did those ever get hit? Like, we had times where there was 11 sellers for one buyer in the condo market. Could you imagine what awful things you have to be as the seller that gets the buyer? You have to do awful things like lower your price to the very basement in order to win in those types of competitions. And when the bottom of your market is hurt like that, Well, if the $200,000 seller in my market, I want you to tell that you can buy stuff here at 200 grand. If they can't sell, well, then they don't upgrade to a $300,000 property. Then there's less people in that price range that can't sell and they don't upgrade to a 400,000. So like you lose all your verticals. And at the top of the market, you see the biggest swings. So luxury property goes really like it sways way more than the rest because it's not a utility market. It's like a want-in market, which is a little bit different. So we saw that, and that was a lot of my career is talking to people that had lost money on their real estate and were looking for options. A lot of these were families that needed another bedroom. Some of these were investors that were trying to find ways to still make income. And then in 2022, we started to see interest rates change. And I know that that was kind of a turning point for your market, and that turning point for your for those large markets like Toronto and Vancouver and their general areas ended up being what sponsored our market. So since 2022, we have had more migration than any other time. It's never been affordability that has caused people to move to Alberta in modern history. And at one point, there were so many people moving to Alberta that we were getting more net migration than anywhere else that you could draw this same amount of land on a map globally. So, being that that was the case, we saw people that were selling properties that here would sell for 500,000, but in Toronto or Vancouver would sell for like 1.8 to 2.2 million. And they were coming and buying them. They weren't buying the same price as what they were leaving in those other markets because they were obviously financially damaged, but man, did they ever show up here. So the middle of our market really heated up because families learned that Edmonton is one of the last places that you can afford a house with a garage and a yard and a vacation all at the same time. So we've literally, probably half of our business this year has been people relocating primarily from BC and Ontario. The middle of our market is hot as all get out. The bottom of our market is still absorbing that excess inventory for years and years. And it looks like it's about to basically get in shape. And that means that those verticals are going to ignite here. And we can see that some of the people with the most money, they understand that. We've had more real estate investment trusts investing in real estate in Edmonton than we've ever seen. It's almost like watching National Geographic when they get to the end of the very depressing dry season when everything's almost dying and suddenly the rain comes. That's really what it feels like. So it's been an interesting market.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a flippening happening with the dry season and the wet season between our two markets, and a lot of people that I know have definitely been talking about it, been talking about moving out to Calgary, to Edmonton, to Nova Scotia, to anywhere but here, essentially. And sellers have become over the years so entitled to a quick sale and a high price and a new benchmark and record setting that we're now not really used to needing to explain, why these things aren't happening for them. And you guys have been very used to explaining these types of markets to people, and almost in some ways not needing to, because it's just been so blatantly obvious within the public zeitgeist that the market's not doing well. Whereas here, I feel like there's definitely a mixed bag. There's still a lot of the same kind of, well, I know the market's not doing well, but my house is going to be better. And so that I feel like the tide will start to turn eventually if it hasn't started already. But I guess from your perspective, having been in a depressed market for a very long time and being very used to those conversations, if you were talking to a seller here, what kind of words of wisdom would you give?
Well, you got to move through those stages, right? Like you're obviously talking to people that are in the denial stage, where they see things changing around them, but they, for some reason, feel as though it doesn't apply to them. And then you're going to find other buyer or other sellers that are angry. They're angry at the government. A lot of them are angry at the news because they think that news leads public opinion. You can't give them that much credit. News is a megaphone for public opinion. They don't like the things that they invest in are the things that people will read because it supports how they feel inside. So a lot of people think that negative news is what's leading buyers into fear, but the truth is buyers are scared, and this is just the evidence of that. And then after that, they kind of like move into that. Maybe you met somebody that was in that bargaining stage. So they're like, okay, Adam, like there's got to be a way through this. And otherwise, there's just some people that are scared that are not ready to partake. So we saw that because we end up being a collection of where everybody moves from. You know, Edmonton has an incredible food scene. We have every culture here, and the restaurants are amazing. But in that, you get so many different perspectives, just like you saw. You get people that believed that real estate was supposed to go up for their entire life. That's just like how it works. Is every year it's more and more and more and more. And those people need more information than the others. But I definitely relate to what you were experiencing because, from a realtor's perspective, sometimes it feels like you're walking into a listing appointment and you're asking them, hey, listen, do you want it in the stomach or the mouth? You know, like this is going to hurt. And some people don't understand that. And there's more explaining. Some people already understand that. And it's more about execution. But real estate never works that way. It never just goes up continually. There's always movements. It's a long-term game.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely saw a lot of the more extreme end of short-term strategic thinking for our market in the pre-construction kind of area of things, where due to a ripping hot market, assignments became this kind of really intense, almost like day trading market for real estate. And like you said, real estate's a long game. Like there shouldn't ever really be the idea of day trading in it. And so all of that is coming very much tumbling down. However, it's not really in the, I guess, in the spotlight as much because the assignment market's not on MLS. And so the public really doesn't have that kind of scope or that view, that lens into it the same way that realtors do because of the way that those things are shopped a little bit more within realtor network groups and things like that. So,
Well, that's interesting from a public standpoint because from the public, what they're hearing is the market is crashing. But that actually has a definition, and the market is not crashing in Toronto. Uh, the reason that we can see it's not crashing is because people are not actually selling. There's many less transactions, and the transactions that are taking place are not supporting values being down as much as people speculate. So this is something that kind of happens because it's an echo chamber where we hear that real estate is awful, but it's actually realtors having an awful time. You know, inside your body is a biome. And a lot of people don't understand that when we go to the washroom, a lot of what we get rid of as solid waste is actually a population that lives inside of us as bacteria. And so if you stop eating sugar, that part of the population is going to die. And that causes them to release chemicals that can affect your mood. This is why people have trouble changing diets. And that is the same thing when we zoom out here. So you were talking about people that were making their living through doing construction. We are talking about other people that were making their living by doing these speculatory movements where they, what we're talking about when we say assignment is that they agree to buy from a builder at a specific price. But then before they take possession and it's complete, they actually sell it at a profit to someone else, right?
mhm.
And we call that skipping title. And that's something that doesn't happen in our market anymore because it was so hot during 2005, 2006 that they basically stopped that from happening. The other things that happen
Oh,
in
hold on.
markets,
You can't actually do that in Alberta? It's illegal?
yep.
Wow. That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Hmm. Yeah, you got to accept title and then transfer. So that really changes how many people can do this. And it's pretty odd when you see Alberta make regulation, because one of the reasons that people are loving moving here is the best thing about rednecks. We have redneck regulation resistance. We don't have a
Mm.
landlord-tenant board that takes you months and months in order to even get a hearing. People aren't paying the bills, they get evicted here. We are where the rubber meets the road, and every time our government tries to introduce a rule, we really ask them, explain why we need that. Explain why you guys should be the management, because we watch the government manage things and they are shit at managing things. We
Hmm.
shouldn't have them manage barely anything. I do think that property rights are something that does fit within it, but only actually enforcing property rights. The way that they've been running things in Ontario from the outside is like, oh man, like you guys took a manager from Chuck E. Cheese and gave him all the power. Like what happened? So we do have some rules like that. Just like if you do condo conversions here, you have to actually have a reserve fund and stuff like that. That was also big things. But now we're seeing reverse condo conversions here.
What do
We're
you mean?
seeing so many people that move here to rent that we'll get one buyer that makes an offer through a property management company to buy every condo unit in a building. And then they will go back into single owner as a rental.
So you're not, it's not purpose-built rental. It's a condo building that becomes a rental building.
Becomes an apartment. Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
And that's because I guess the investors are looking at their performas. They're saying we have recourse if someone's not paying rent. Therefore, the capital is being supported by proper legislative property rights protections.
Yeah. And finding rentals here is very difficult, and rent is up year over year again. So when we see these trends, everybody's saying, like, how can you make money? And because our market was so challenged, the landscape was changed that way. Like I'm talking to an investor in Vancouver that I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he's definitely close, right? And this guy owns major assets in Edmonton that they haven't done anything with in 30 years because why bother? But now Edmonton is where the action is. Like if you take a look at Calgary, first off, many of the people moving to Alberta look down on Alberta. They're like, oh, you freaking rednecks living out in the sticks, right? With your crazy ways and your the way that you produce money and make energy and so on isn't like our preferred method. And then when things got hard due to rising interest rates, suddenly they looked at it and they're like, man, we're going to end up in Alberta. So first they all went to Calgary. I can understand why. They have a better brochure. They're the gateway to the mountains. There's a whole bunch of white collar jobs, which is more easily transferable from major cities like Vancouver and Toronto. But Calgary rose in price so fast that now, when you take a look at income versus affordability overall, you can see that they're starting to run into some of the same affordability challenges as places like Toronto and Vancouver. So where they were on a massive upswing, it's almost like when you're traveling on the highway going 110 or 120 and then you have to slow down for a town to like 80. So they haven't really like went much slower, but they kind of feel like they've plateaued. Whereas Edmonton, for most of my career, we've been a typical house like $100,000 less than Calgary. Now it's 50% less. Like it's wild what the price difference here is, and that's why we're getting more people moving here in droves than previously it was all to Calgary. So it's interesting to see how that works and what the people's opinions are as they come here.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, something that almost reminds me of like Texas, right? Like I went to go visit Austin and it's like the blueberry in the kind of like bushel of raspberries. And it's it's a very interesting political landscape when that happens. So, do you guys have things like rent control there?
No,
Okay, this is something that I've been very, very interested in because as an investor myself, like I have a rental property. Um, I've never really, and I've been a renter myself as well. I've never really understood why regulating price discovery is ever a good thing. Even as a renter, I was kind of like, well, you're kind of hamstringing my ability to leave now, which is now kind of screwing everything up. So what would you say has been happening with rent prices, given the fact that you guys have a largely unregulated market
They
historically?
have been flowing with the market. Like the market is the most efficient way to solve for price, supply, and demand. There, when you limit the market, you end up making something work in one spot at the cost to others. Like you and I have a mentor that's dear to both of us, and Richard Robbins constantly says, everything you do will either add or take away from the experience of others. It all counts. And in this case, when you create rent control, you're essentially giving a benefit to one group at the cost of others. So, like the rent control in Toronto did a few things. It one screwed the buildings it was in because investors will not pay more money. They will not do the things to upkeep the building. You are literally tying people into a sinking ship. Meanwhile, it drives the price up of making new things and of the things around it that are not subject to those same type of controls. And then the other thing it does is it limits investors from making the gains that they would normally make during those rip runs in the market. And if you would have let the rent rise, it would have been a situation where it would have basically burned itself out and then corrected. But to save a small group of people in the midst of this, it's not reasonable. Like we were in Toronto. I remember standing in this place with Ralph in Markham, Ontario, and that place itself for like 500,000 here. It was listed for like 1.6 there. And then I looked at the average household income in Markham and it's $10,000 less than here. Like, where do they eat? Do they eat from a can? Do they ever get to fly to go on vacations? You know, what's the actual lifestyle and why do people think it's so good? When you zoom out, Canada looks like seals on a beach, meaning that 80% of us live within 200 kilometers of the US border. We're attracted to these places like Toronto and Vancouver because a lot of the time that's where new Canadians land. So that's where they get established. And then we end up with this situation where there's all these great towns throughout our country that they struggle to stay populated, but they would actually offer a much better lifestyle than what some of the people are living with in these massive cities. So I really wonder about that and how that would work. The way that I see regulation, I remember like I live near a national park called Jasper. And when you drive in there, there's these things called deer bridges. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So the deer bridges are these natural, they're almost like tunnels that you drive through. They go over the road and they're big, like essentially like ridges of earth that are made naturally looking so that deer will cross over the highway and not essentially put drivers at risk or deer at risk. And the way that you make these work is you take these fences and you run funnels into the forest so that once the deer are in there, they're kind of funneled over the roadway. Now, all that governments can actually do, they can't actually make the free market do things. They can only fence it in. And you know what? That makes a whole bunch of sense for those deer. If you set up this type of system, you're going to save more of them. They're going to make it across the road. They're not going to endanger people, except once you introduce wolves. Wolves are also a natural part of that ecosystem. In fact, the deer are dependent on them for not overpopulating. And the wolves know exactly how to use those fences. They use them to hunt. They funnel the deer into the fences like an ambush. And that's what the free market does when it's regulated. You actually encourage more nefarious behavior because of the rule set that's put forth. And most of the time, these governments are so short-sighted that the rule set is for a very limited time, specific instance, but the long-lasting effect leave everybody trapped. Like, look at the rental market where you're from due to rent control and the landlord-tenant board that is obviously underfunded, can't get anything done, and it's creating these nefarious situations where you get professional tenants that are screwing the system. Like, that's awful.
Yeah, there's a few things that you kind of mentioned there that I would kind of like to kind of unpack a bit. Um, One thing I was on Tom and Steve's podcast about a month ago, maybe a little more, and one of the things that we talked about was exactly the efficiency of free markets over regulated markets. And the way that I guess from my like kind of nerdy background, being a bit more techie, is that like I kind of almost like tried to put it in terms of like computational system values. So like if you if you had a centralized computational system versus a distributed computational system, what's more effective? So distributed computational systems are always going to be more effective. And in a free marketplace, each consumer is its own distributed computational system that works both in a competitive and cooperative nature with all the other distributed computational systems to arrive at value. And that's how price discovery happens naturally. Now, that is the most efficient way of doing things, mathematically speaking. Like that's not, an arguable like it's just that's
Because
factual.
to use something centralized creates bottlenecks.
Correct, exactly. And so you could never have a centralized system that would be powerful enough to outcompete a distributed computational system. And so that's kind of like how I explained it there, but I felt like maybe it was like a bit too nerdy and didn't really kind of click in some sense with consumers. But at the end of the day, what you're saying is exactly that with the Deer Bridges, is that you can't. I guess it was, oh man, who is that economist that said it? I, his name escapes me right now, but basically he said there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
You got it.
Yeah.
Everything will either add or take away from somebody's experience. And a lot of the time, with governments, it ends up being this centralized system where you only get to vote on things every so often. There's only so much things they can change. Whereas a free market will be adaptive. And the way that it's adaptive is because every buyer and seller get to essentially vote with their dollars at the same time live right now. And that's something that has been taken away. And I can understand why in some cases, like you're in an extreme market, you're dealing with extreme things, right? But you can't just unpack that stuff. You can't, like, once the market changes, like, look how far the institutions are behind in helping what the problem is now.
Well, I guess the argument would then be don't help, just get out of the way. And
Hmm.
that doesn't seem to really be an option here in bigger cities where we have a lot of kind of just more radical political thought processes going through it, being a lot more left leaning in interventionism. So, are you guys now seeing that kind of affect your marketplace where the my net migration being so high from other more left leaning places affecting your political landscape when it comes to regulating markets?
It kind of works a different way. Sorry. Um, Most of the time, we try to keep kids away from sharp objects. And there was this school, I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been Sweden. And next to the school was a junkyard. And so a lot of the resources from the teachers and supervisors was to keep the children out of the junkyard because there's broken glass and tools and all kinds of things that could be dangerous to them. And so the children would rebel against that. and they would try to sneak into the junkyard and find their ways in or bring things back that were dangerous. And the behavior was that they were not controlling their own risk. However, as an experiment, they let the kids into the junkyard. And what we saw was, instead of supervisors just overwhelmed with all the trouble, we saw children policing each other and themselves to keep each other safe. That's what happens in a free market. The market here, the people are not as extreme as they are in Toronto because there's not the same safety nets. If you F around, you're going to find out.
Mm.
And so the consumer behavior is much more, it's actually much more considerate than the places that have high regulation, because they're basically trying to get around the supervisors and do nefarious things, and they're focused on doing nefarious things. Whereas here they're not, because you can do what you want and you can therefore experience the consequences to that.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about the considerate or polite behavior within a market as being a self-regulating practice, because here, I guess in big cities especially, everything moves so fast and the mentality is to be that of being a shark, or, getting an edge or finding an angle, when really it's almost like the idea itself is kind of a cloak and dagger, right? Where we're almost socially masking poor decision making based on the skirting of regulatory practices, in order to make more money, because you couldn't without doing that. And so we've kind of socially hardwired a ideology around it, whereas over there it seems like you don't need to be, because everybody just understands what consequences are, and they're natural consequences. They're not fabricated.
I
Not to
met
find
with
that
a
people.
landlord yesterday.
Hmm.
He's had the same tenants in his property for 12 years. The only time he's ever changed his rent is when his mortgage went up, and he changed it exactly dollar for dollar. Do you know people like that?
No.
I know plenty. And that's the difference, is that it is a different approach when you don't have the interference that you have. Because I see it differently. Your government benefits from creating an us and a them.
Yes,
Number of votes is from a group that doesn't actually contribute to the well-being of all of you.
correct. So they're just
The
trying to
top
play the system.
10% in your market pay for everything. The
Right.
top 10% in your market pay 90% of the tax base in your market. These are the hardest working, hardest pulling individuals. And what the government does is it makes that group them so that it can market to us for votes. And by creating that dividing line, they make themselves necessary with stuff like rent control. This is a scam.
Yeah. I think that, again, I can't remember who said it, but democracy is not a great system. It's just the best one that we've come up with so far.
Yeah,
Um,
it was Winston Churchill. And he
yeah,
said that democracy is the worst government system in the history of life, except for the rest of them.
right. So essentially, we have short-term thinking from regulators who are trying to please constituents that are the masses. And in order to do that, they need to use the club and ditch the carrot.
hmm And they constantly demonize people that do anything to make wealth. Like, even look at like somebody like Jeff Bezos as an example. We have all given money to Jeff, and now we're upset about it. And that's because Jeff did things that we think are amazing. Like when you receive Amazon at your door, you bought something, but it doesn't feel like shopping. It kind of feels like Christmas. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, and they don't understand that there was like, you have to let these leaders step in and do these things that are huge, and there's a value exchange for that. And if you don't like the value exchange, then look at the difficulty level of actually doing something at that level.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The idea of creating value for others is completely overshadowed by the value created for himself. In Jeff Bezos's particular situation, where I think he only owns like 9% of Amazon, which means that if it's a, just round numbers, $1 trillion company, it means that he's created almost $900 billion of value for others, but it's overshadowed by the money that he's made for himself in the company.
We look at the people, we look at the people overall. It ends up being almost like a glitch in the system, meaning that instead of looking at it like a net positive or a net negative, we actually just make a judgment on how we feel about the person and what we can see through their Instagram. But when it ties down to like what this does for average families, I think that average families don't understand that they're getting mob protection. And what I mean by that is you pay us protection money because if you don't, we'll be the problem. They don't get it. And that's the way that it's working. There needs to be some type of reconstruction here because when you take a look at how Canada's been making money when you zoom out, we've been making money by bringing people in and building them houses. That's not sustainable. That's literally like trying to run your car on its own exhaust. And we keep bending the systems to make that real, and it's not real. You actually have to make a product that you can distribute in order to make money. And where is that in Canada right now?
Yeah. I don't think it is to be anywhere to be found. Like our actual GDP per capita is just sinking, where we get these messages from, the central planning authorities about immigration being a net positive to GDP. But when GDP per capita is sinking, how on earth is that argument more like salient? It just seems to be more of the politicization of basically everything in order to support the few who stand to benefit from things like deficit spending, which, is just people who are, I guess, the closest to the money printer at the end of the day.
Yeah, when you take a look at this as like how it worked is that they printed money that caused inflation. And inflation pooled into the markets of Toronto and Vancouver, and specifically into housing as a pandemic effect. So during the pandemic, what ignited the fire was that families used the money that they normally spend on entertainment and travel on real estate because it was the only thing available to them. And also, when they changed the rule set, which meant you didn't have to drive to work anymore, you found these families that were overinvested in location because they were living close to jobs they didn't have to travel to anymore, and they were paying a premium for that. But then they were underinvested in the characteristics of houses, making them big enough because now they had to school from home and work from home. So they needed like less location and more characteristics. And that's what we saw. We saw basically a ripple effect of people moving from the highest density locations to the lowest density locations or bedroom communities. But then once they tried to get the motor back running again, you have to distribute that excess, and that inflationary money had to travel. And so now that's what we're seeing here. Because during the pandemic, the market where you are was consistent multiple offers, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think that one point you and I spoke and you said, well, what's pretty normal for me is running like 50 or 70 groups through one property over a weekend and ending up with somewhere between 15 and 30 some offers.
Mhm.
And you just do that over and over and over again.
Mhm. Yep.
And now it's coming the other way, where that type of effect is now coming to my market as a secondary impact or tertiary impact from where it essentially arrived. But now, when you take a look at what that was caused by, it was caused all by government regulation. Like in hindsight, a lot of people don't agree with how we handled pandemic. And financially, most people don't understand that we will be paying for this for generations. We all did fine. And this ended up being like the equivalent of a false alarm. And so now we're paying for it. And that
Mm.
means that people need to change their lifestyle, they need to change their rules. And the effect to real estate that many people consider normal that are your age, because this was the only market that they've ever seen, suddenly that is almost like the Wizard of Oz, and the big head is gone, and now you see this little weird man that is just another guy.
Given all of that, do you think that Canada, in particular, Toronto, Vancouver, which makes up the, you know, lion's share of the real estate market on a just, capital basis, is going to see a very, I want to say normal marketplace again, because there was nothing normal about Canada and in Toronto and Vancouver in particular over the last few years. And we were just so anomalous compared to any other marketplace in the world that the entitlement for things selling very quickly and for a very high price has now, really ingrained itself into the very fabric of the, consumer mindset. Do you think that now going back to, or that we will be sustaining a much more normal marketplace where, like, hey, if you list your house for sale, sitting on the market for 3 months is like not that unusual, compared to everywhere else in the world, if not longer. Do you think that that's going to be a more sustained kind of situation?
There's a few levels to this. So, one, we would have to kind of define what's normal. And if you take like long-term averages, there's a few things that we're already seeing kind of move towards normal. So the preferred mortgage product for Canadians is a 5-year fixed, and over a 100-year average, that's actually pretty close to 6%. So some people were thinking that these low interest rates were normal, even though they were an anomaly for sure. In fact, we've never seen interest rates as low as what we saw during pandemic, and we likely never will again. So that's one thing that's moving to normal and creating this kind of change. The other thing is that normally it's pretty hard to make it in these big cities like Toronto and Vancouver, right? It's much easier to make a living in places like Edmonton or Calgary or Saskatoon, all of these other places. So we're probably going to see a distribution of population, which is what should absolutely happen. And what I mean by that is that you have to spread out to find great food sources. And if there isn't those same type of opportunities available where you are, well, look at a map and find the place where you can make it. Because even making it in some of those places is harder than making it in other places like New York or San Francisco. So that's part of what's normal. Now, the other thing is that what's normal for real estate when you kind of zoom out is to get like 5, 7% gains over a period of time, where some years it will gain less or none, and other years it will gain more, and it will kind of average out there. And that's also not what we saw in kind of modern history for that. So you'll see much less speculation, much less construction. All of these things are hallmarks of the market that was. And then when we take a look at at what timeline this will take place, it's really yet to be determined because there's some unsolved problems. So it's so funny where you have people that almost like don't understand what job Canada has. Like, what is our job? What makes us the most money? We manufacture some things, sure. But what has made us the most money historically was our natural resources. And our natural resources like lumber and oil and farming, those types of things are the foundation of an economy. But then you build on that and you get all the way up to the tippy top, which is like tech and research. But when you come upon hard times, you have to give up the stuff you want to do for the things that you need to do. So, as much as we're all thinking that artificial intelligence is just going to take over everything all the time and we're just at the edge here, it's very likely that we're probably going to see some hard times that take away from that scale. And what I mean by that is that you can't fund things like that when the economy doesn't support it, and you've got to go back to the fundamentals that got you to the table. So even though the liberal government doesn't normally look at things like, hey, I want to action these natural resources, they're definitely talking about it now. And here in Edmonton, we think that, net migration and affordability has done amazing things for our economy. It's very likely that we're going to see high oil prices on top of that. And if that's the case, we may see what a 2 million person Edmonton looks like, which would double our current population.
Wow. Yeah, the ripple effects from all of this seems to be really interesting. It almost feels like what we did manufacture, what we need to be manufacturing, and what historically has been kind of this safety net for Canada's exports, um, almost transformed into I don't I don't know any other way to say it, but just kind of like the world's money laundromat in a way where we just like the capital controls from China, from Iran, from any other repressive, oppressive regime that, people wanted to escape from, inevitably ended up kind of washing through here via real estate. And now that those capital controls are ramped way the hell up, that, that ocean of money is now drying up real quick. And we're starting to see the effects of that. And so it does seem like Toronto and Vancouver are learning, the hard way that the piper always gets paid at the end of the
Mhm.
day.
And when you trace it back from like the money that was spent on a Starbucks coffee, well, maybe that was earned waiting a table at a restaurant. And maybe that bill was paid by somebody who was an accountant for a business that does hospitality. And if that's the case, then it's all like this tertiary industry that's rotating money through. But where is this money coming from in the system when it's not printed by the government? There's so many people that are just like, hey, we don't really know.
Hmm.
And that's because it's ugly. That's because it's awful. The truth of the matter is that we've been making money through encouraging people to come here from other countries, and now we can't fulfill the promise that we had given them. There's many of these things that ended up being scams. There's these circumventions and also a government that's putting rules across almost everybody, but then letting just a couple people that their favorites are pass, right? Like we've seen investigations into companies like SNC Lavalin and others just dry up and disappear. This is a sign that we are in the mix, that this is not as what it appears. And meanwhile, in Alberta, we get a whole bunch of people talking trash about whether or not we should ever do oil again. Well, they're using microphones that are built by oil, well, they're driving cars, and I don't care if they're electric or not. They're the rubber, you can't even have the tires without oil. And that they don't see that these components all come from a place where we actually have a job. They just don't really like the job that we historically had, and they think that there are these other opportunities. Well, show me. Show me us reinvent ourselves into something that does something different with this population and this land mass. And if not, toe the line. Find a way to dig in and help Canada become better. Find a way to help us become less controlled by other interests. Like, this is going to be a time where Canadians have to dig in. And I live in the place where we pull things up from our bootstraps. I live in a place where we don't depend on the government. And I live in a place where the government is actually afraid of the people. And it's a very small place when you look at the rest of Canada.
Yeah, that's super eye-opening. I'm really always very happy to speak to other people in different markets to get a bit of the goggles just peeled off the eyes for a bit, to be able to understand just outside of our own frame of reference, just for a little while, just to understand and refocus and recenter on, what expectations should be versus what they are. And so I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're a busy guy. So I guess just to kind of bring us home here, you've been super enlightening in this conversation. I hope everyone's gained a lot of value from it. If people want to find you, where can they do so?
I'm easy to find on Instagram. There's a lot of public information on me. I run the highest rated and reviewed real estate team in the greater Edmonton area. So there's a whole bunch of ways that people can also understand whether or not I am credible. And I welcome people to look into that. And if I could leave this with a message for those places where they've run into this horrible situation where they're government dependent, if you look around and start just taking care of each other, you can leave the government out of it.
Yeah, it's such a interesting. I was talking to somebody about this kind of more libertarian ideals behind all of this, and it always ended up coming back to the same argument, which I call the roads argument. And it's like, well, if we don't have the government taking in money, then who's going to build the roads? And I kind of like remember kind of saying to them in a way that I'm not sure it really clicked, but I just remember saying like the fact that you said that is a demonstration of your own Stockholm syndrome, right? Because you're not recognizing the very simple, obvious truth that without the government, we self-organize to create much, much more complex things than roads.
And I still haven't yet to see a government build a road, right? Like when I go and see the people building roads, they're not government workers.
No.
And then also, wait a second, is there really such a thing as government money? I thought it was our money,
Right.
right? So we are building the roads right now, but here's how it's actually working. For every dollar you put into the system, less than 48 cents actually goes towards what you're trying to help. Because so far, the government has proven that they are the least efficient and worst managers out there. And if you just went directly to people that would build the roads, it would help. But because we have trouble caring for each other at this scale, we have to, we're paying a tax for it. We're paying they're like, oh yeah, well, if not the government, then how will it be fair? You call this fair? What the heck? The government is getting you coming, going once every day and twice on Sundays. There's people that think that they have cheap energy. I was talking to people in BC and they have hydro dams. And they're like, look at the rate of what we pay for energy. This is so cheap. And it's like, you guys, they're only showing you what you pay for electricity. Meanwhile, your taxes are crazy. And that's what they're using to build and service the dams. These giant concrete structures are not just something you make one time and then they're fine. Like they don't understand that it's not they're showing them a bill that makes them happy. Meanwhile, they're doing things like land titles is a paper process. Is that the same in Ontario where you guys are actually giving the government a percentage of the financial outcome of your house for a paper process?
You
Land
mean,
tax for tracks, transfer tax.
yeah, the biggest scam ever is just you're buying a house, so pay us money.
A 6-year-old could do this paper process,
Yeah.
and they're charging a percentage of your financial outcome. That's unfreaking believable. And then we look back and we're like, yeah, but look at the electricity bill. It's so cheap. Oh, lump it together and look at what you're paying for what you're getting. And then tell me why you live where you live. Like, you need to change that. We need to be more confident that we will care for each other because the people that we're trusting to care for us, they're running a childcare center in between a gun store and a liquor store. This is not the people you want to raise your kids.
I can't think of a better note to end it off on. Thank you. It's so refreshing speaking to someone else who's also much more libertarian minded. Um,
But
big.
empathetically,
Well, yeah, because
people look at libertarians like they're cold.
no, they're not. This is another thing that I remember. I was listening to a lecture by Milton Friedman, which still holds true to this day. I mean, the guy was just so brilliant, and I remember he was posed a very interesting question about how you do care for the least fortunate in a society, because even Milton himself recognized that in order to have stability within social fabrics, that you needed to have some net at the bottom. And the way that he put it and what his idea was so interesting. And it never really got much attention. And I really feel like it should have. What he said was, and most people don't even know this about him, is he said, instead of creating all these government bureaucracies in order to um, distribute what they feel is necessary for those people, all you do is you end up with more bureaucracy and more bloat. And the money doesn't get distributed to those people at all. In fact, it's just a giant scam. And so what he said was the best way to do it, in his view, was to create a negative income tax. He's like, that way you don't need any other government bureaucracies, any other three-letter agencies to do it, because we already have one. It's, in the States it was the IRS, but here it's the CRA. Just do that, right? Don't let the deductions go to zero and then bottom out there. Let them go into negative and then just pay the money to the individuals and let the individuals have the freedom of choice to do what they want with the money. And he was saying what you'll see is that the money being distributed that way would be actually much more helpful and create less of an incentive to remain on the system. And it was a very it took a while for me to really understand what he was trying to say, because he had to explain it so in depth, and we've never seen an idea quite like that. So I was,
The distribution model. It's where
yes.
each person would contribute to the things that they are most passionate about, and they would have the ability to do it because they didn't give the government their money, so that half goes forward. And you mentioned the CRA. In 2018, the CRA had, man, like 39,000 employees. Now they have 59,000 employees, and that's not reflective of how our population has changed. In fact, that's significantly more employees than the IRS has, that service a community that's 10 times our size. And that's the business we're in, is we're paying people to keep us prisoner. We're paying them to essentially enforce tax law at like a ridiculous rate. And most of the government systems are huge. In fact, if we've been talking about what job we have as Canadians, our job is bureaucracy right now.
It's so crazy, but it's true. And people actually advocate for more of it. So it's kind of, I think Solzhenitsyn said it. He said that the gates of hell are locked from the inside.
Oh, yeah. And that reminds me of Winston Churchill again. If you're going through hell, keep going.
Taylor Hack, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I always find something so illuminating about every time we speak, and you tickle my brain in the right way, man. So I thank you so much for that. I hope everyone really enjoyed listening to this. If you haven't yet, like, subscribe, leave us a comment, tell us what you think. And Taylor, we'll do this again soon. Thank you so much, man.
I appreciate that. And keep doing this. Adam, the way that you make relationships is something that is a superpower. The people that you know are some of the people that hold the keys to the information that will change the outcome. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for having me on, and I'm happy to come back. Cheers.